When I was asked to bring together a parent panel to talk about a topic that was important to bereaved parents, the first thing that came to mind for me was the idea of building your child's legacy and continuing your bond with them. Just because over the 8 years that I've worked as the bereavement coordinator, I've become really aware that this is so important to families. So that's how we chose our title, and I assembled my parent partners together, and here we are, and we're really glad to be here. So I'm going to try to breeze through these really, really quickly. So write down any questions if you have them, but I want to be able to get to the answers to some of our questions and for our panelists to speak. So what is a continuing bond? The idea of continuing bonds started in the mid-90s. So it's the idea that what you guys feel as natural and what you do naturally and what people in grief do is to stay connected to the people that they love that have died. So it really is the idea that death may end a life or a physical relationship, but there's no way it can end a relationship. And in my 8 years working at Children's, I've really noticed that especially the bond between a parent and a child is one that death cannot break. So it's not broken, but it shifts and it looks different. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes in the ways that it does look different. So it's any way that you remain connected with your child. Doesn't have to be fancy, can be something as simple as talking with them or feeling their presence. And something that I've learned a lot over the years is that there's a lot of cultures like the Japanese that have been doing continuing relationships with their loved ones and their ancestors for years and years and years. So it's built in the fabric of other societies. Next slide, please, Jennifer. So I always feel awful when I talk about this because prior to the 90s, us grief counselors were being terrible and we're telling people, all right, like now it's time to move on. Now it's time to sever that connection you have with your loved one that has died and move on and detach from them and put them out of your mind and don't think about it. So obviously that wasn't helpful. And so we're doing a lot of harm to people, I think. And so if any of y'all are readers and are interested in this, I've put the name of the book that kind of introduced this called Continuing Bonds, New Understanding of Grief. It's in the slide where you can message me later to get the name of it. But it was really controversial when it first came out. But the interesting thing is now that this is accepted clinical practice, because what we've learned in grief is that sometimes it just takes opening yourself up to listening to what your heart wants and what your desires are, right? And just becoming aware of that and allowing yourself to go with grief to find some healing. And that's what a continuing bond is. So, next slide. Here's some examples. These may be things that y'all do just really naturally and haven't even realized that you're doing, right? So visiting gravesides or special places. A lot of people will include kids in their family pictures and holidays or special days. There was a picture with Rachel in her bio with her holding a picture of Henry, or including them in holiday cards, special ways like that. Pulling out keepsakes, important memories. A lot of people think about what your child would want you to do when making decisions or trying to decide your life course. So setting time aside for journaling, asking your child for guidance, seeking places where you feel close to them. I'm sure y'all can probably think of many, many ways that you stay connected to your child. With that, that's the end of my slides, because I think that I'm interested to hear what all of our panelists have to say and to talk a little bit more about their continuing bonds with their kids and the ways that they build their legacy. And so my first question is, these are big technical terms, right? Continuing bonds and legacy. And so I'm wondering what they mean to all of you as panelists.
Want me to go first? I'm not on the panel, but I'm going to go first. I'm going to open it up and say that I think for me, I was learning the term continuing bond theory was very freeing because it's something that came naturally to me. And, you know, one of the things that really drove it home to me is right after my son died, a friend of mine gave me a necklace that had Ben's name on it. And since then, I've collected this whole like collection of things, pieces of jewelry that I can wear, a different piece every day, but I put one on every day. And when I don't put it on, I feel disoriented in a way. And so knowing that I can have that tangible attachment to him just in a quiet way is very meaningful for me.
Beautiful, Jennifer. Thank you. I think for me, so Henry was only 9.5 months old when he died. And so for me, this idea of continuing bonds or legacy is really about, or has been up to this point, really about bringing him into the world and sharing his life with the world as much as I do my living children, who are now 10 and 6. So that's kind of how I see it, right? And so I carve out time to be Henry's mom too, because in the busyness of having littles at home, you know, oftentimes they are front and center. And so for me, continuing bonds are all of the ways that I parent my child who has died. Because I think that, you know, I really see it as advocating for normalizing death and grief. Because, you know, when we can create these spaces to honor and celebrate our kids or our loved ones who have died, it's really just normalizing all of it, right? And so celebrating it and honoring it, because really we're celebrating and honoring and remembering the love, because that's what grief is love.
I think for me, continuing the bond is a lot thinking about the lessons that Jacob taught our family, because it was a long life of living in and out of the hospital. But at the same time, Jacob really taught us that the only thing we have is the moment. So can forget that many, many days, getting busy. But that's what I'm really trying to live by, like live in the moment and doing that, because that's what he did. And that really put some good parameters for life. And like Jennifer, I have a necklace that I wear every day with Jacob's thumbprint. And I feel, yeah, sometimes I just have to touch my necklace if I need to feel his strength. So that's something that I also do very often throughout the day.
I hadn't heard the word continuing bonds until we practiced for this panel. And then I've been like diving in to know what it means. But I think for when you put that slide up, Cassie, it's so much more than like tangible, right? I think everybody, Rachel, you talked on like how you parent, that you continue to parent Henry as well as your 2 other children. And I think about just my home and what's in my house. We really have not touched Naomi's room. We have, you probably saw on the slideshow, we have a painting of the girls above the fireplace. And I do have the tangible things, but I love being in the presence of Naomi. My fellow panelists know that I am one of those that still really finds connection, satisfaction at Children's Hospital. Because she was 25, and while we chose to bring her home, she didn't pass away there. It just brings me comfort to be in the surroundings, especially on the 9th floor where I continue to volunteer. So that bond, I feel like I've never thought of that word, but in listening to tonight, Cassie, it's like, wow, it's everywhere I go. Like you, Jennifer, saying in the car, listening to music, or me in my house, or visiting the gravesite. So I'm going to buy the book because I love the theory.
We see it a lot in parenting our living children. And like you said, Cassie, we do William's pictures with us in every Christmas card, every family picture. He's represented in our home physically and in his artwork and his image. Let's move on.
So looking at your bios and just knowing you guys, I know all of you have done really lovely, beautiful things to share your children with the world and honor them and shape and create a legacy for them. And so something I found myself wondering a lot is, how did you choose when you sat down and you felt like you were in this moment in your grief where you were ready to start honoring your child and sharing them with others? Where did you even start?
We felt really strongly. William passed away at 13 months, and we felt really strongly that he saw the world through the eyes of a child, and he saw the good in people, and he saw the love and the light in people. And so we've kind of made it our mission to carry that on and challenge people, including ourselves, our friends, our family, our networks, to do good in his name. And so that has driven a lot of our healing, our grief, our processing is just trying to do good works in his name. And that's guided a lot of our personal decisions.
Along those same lines, for us, it was a continuation of what we'd done in her lifetime. She taught us to find joy in darkness. And, she spent her first year in the hospital and then was a frequent flyer. And we kind of lived with the shadow of her limited lifespan. And so we kind of had this sense that we had to enjoy the time we were given. But, there were hardships along the way, but she never stopped smiling. So it seemed natural to give back. Our big cause, I guess our family cause, has been Make-A-Wish. And I think that's because it's a very easy and worthy cause. And we got so much out of it, but also that idea of, in the darkest times, you could still find that spark of light and happiness and fun and laughter. And so we have continued. That's kind of our big way of honoring our bond with her, with our community. And it just came naturally, and we'll just continue doing that until it doesn't feel right anymore.
I'll just chime in following Marlena's, it doesn't feel right anymore. We felt really passionate when Addie passed away about starting a research foundation, because there wasn't any research really going on for her rare cancer. So we dove headfirst into a pediatric cancer research foundation, which we've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. Our goal is to get to a phase 1 trial for kids with no more options. And I felt really passionate about that for the first couple of years. But I started to feel a couple years in that I didn't feel as connected personally to my daughter. It was just a public service that we did in her name. So I do believe that will be her legacy, is when we save another child just like her through our phase 1 trial, that will be her legacy. But what I've started to realize now, 3, 4, and 5 years out, is how I really want to connect with her and what comes through for me, and really what is my legacy going to be because of her. And so last year I got certified as a grief coach, and my ultimate goal is to build this wellness retreat that I really wanted to go to years after my daughter passed away, and mental and physical wellness, along with grief coaching, and just everything you need to kind of build your life back. I'm really passionate about your grief turning into gratitude and living your life to your fullest, even after you've been through this devastating loss, and really feeling empowered by your unique journey. So for me, I think legacy has really changed sort of through trial and error. I still do the research foundation, but it's not my primary soul feeling with her presence anymore. It's really more of how she's affected me to do something to help other moms like me. So I think it has changed, and I would tell anybody that's still searching that to keep trying. And I fell through a lot of I gave a lot of presentations. I tried to find my way a lot, as most of the people in this group know, through trial and error, and eventually it just comes to you. It doesn't always come right at the beginning. So keep trying, and try anything and everything that you think will connect you to your child. Some may feel better than others.
To tag on to Christina, I think actually this is so true. I don't think it is just one path. Right after Jacob passed, I was terrified to leave the mitochondrial community. So I continued for years to be a parent, partner, and support for families living with mitochondrial disease. Had a nonprofit with a friend that we were running for the Rocky Mountain region. And actually, by the end of last year, we discontinued that because it wasn't as important anymore. And again, very still involved with the mitochondrial disease community, and actually have the honor to present with one of the parents who are here tonight later this year at a national mitochondrial conference. So it's still part of Jacob's journey, but it is changing. But part of the legacy, I think, was a little bit selfish for me because I had been writing a blog about Jacob for 10 years. And when he passed, I missed it. So I didn't know really what to do, but I continued with the blog. And I wrote to Jacob for, it was about a year and a half, just like by the end of the day, I didn't know what to do with my feelings. And then last year, I actually turned the first year after he passed away into a book, Letters to Jacob. And that just felt like there is a little piece of Jacob that is now still there. And I could never have done that right away. Like it was too close to me. But after a couple of years, I could sort of go back and look at that and structure it. But so I really, really do think let's be open to this legacy, because I think it really, really changes as you go.
Yeah, I just, thank you, Maria. I just want to just state what I think is obvious, because I know the panelists very well, but we, the bar is set very high with these panelists. And I just want to state that, like, you know, you don't have to start a foundation like Christina, or write a book like Maria, or start a nonprofit like Eileen, or raise all kinds of money for Make-A-Wish like Marlena, and speak in your workplaces about grief in the workplace like Rob and Michelle. But you know, it can be just it. I just wanted to state that, like, that it can be something small, right? And it has been. And I think that the continuous thread between all of our shares is that, you know, we're digging deep, and we're listening to our hearts, and we're following that nudge, however we feel it. We're listening to that voice. I like to say that that's Henry talking to me, but we listen to our hearts and we follow the nudge, no matter how big or small. And if it feels right, we stick with it. And if it doesn't feel right, then we don't. And there's no pressure kind of either way. One little way that things have changed, or not, that we started with, was we knew Henry was going to die, and we were planning his celebration of life. And a special book to my husband was the book called The Little Prince. And so we made his celebration of life theme The Little Prince. And so we gave out the books at his celebration of life. And my closest friend made little bookmarks with Henry's face on the Little Prince's body. And so now, you know, 8 years later, we leave copies of The Little Prince and a little card with a few words about Henry, you know, and special places for strangers to pick up. We leave him on his bench at the Botanic Gardens, and we leave him at the Butterfly Pavilion and things like that. But it's just, you know, a small way to kind of share Henry's legacy with the world, and remind people to slow down and remember what's important, as the Little Prince has.
Rachel, I just want to say thank you for saying that out loud. We hear often at CPN, almost continuously, from bereaved parents about this pressure that they feel to do something big. And and in creation of the legacy. And I think it's so important to bring to mind that it can be, that continuing bond can be as big or as small as you want it to be, and it can change. It can be as simple as, you know, saying good morning every morning and just knowing that it's there and filling you up, or putting on that piece of jewelry. Or it can be as life-changing as switching your career over. And also to recognize that those changes don't always last forever, that they're just like when your child is living in there with you, it's evolving in how you hold that relationship. It's still evolving in this continuing bond that you're having with them. And I appreciate that you said that out loud, because I think a lot of parents feel an overwhelming burden to create something huge. And it's not, the importance is creating what keeps that relationship between you and your child.
That's right.
I was thinking when you all were talking was all of the beautiful things that you do, big and small, to share your children's light with the world, right? To share their best traits, or like Rob and Michelle, share the world through the eyes of a child, right? All of the things that you do to keep their light in the world. And I know personally, just hearing your stories, there are places that I go and things that I do where I think, oh, there's Henry, or I'm at Disneyland and I'm not working and I think, oh, Lucy, you know? And so I'm wondering what your experiences have been with seeing your children's light in the world and seeing how it's affected other people around you, your community or your family, big or small.
I'm going to jump in because I was just about ready to say what Rachel said, because I got to tell you truthfully, I wasn't even thinking Naomi legacy. It was really my mom, you know, who was like, just so you know, this is what we've done, you know, with an endowment at Children's. But I think the little thing about just talking about your child, I talk about Naomi all the time. My husband, who's sitting behind me, we talk about Naomi all the time. And I think what that does is it opens up to others that it's okay to talk about Naomi. We talk a lot about on our panel about you kind of have that period of, you know, people sending condolence calls, you know, calls or cards or visits, and then it kind of drops off, and that hesitancy of, oh, do we talk about, you know? And so I think the impact about talking about your child is that it opens up the channel for others to also talk about your child, and that's so. When I think about it, it's so simple, but I've seen, you know, that it has allowed a lot of our family and friends that aren't sure even 4 years later. But I'll also say Naomi's sister Mariah still doesn't love it, you know, so as a sibling, she still struggles with the conversation.
I would add just a quick bit to that, Eileen. What's amazing is when you talk about your special person, and when we talk about William, it really allows other people to talk about their special people. And I will say that what's been amazing is how many folks we've talked to that we had no idea that they had experienced loss, that then open up because we have and so I would say, you know, it's not only healthy for us to talk about it, but it's kind of an amazing community that we found because we're willing to talk about it.
And I think it's been a real learning experience for me that as I see other people honor Lucy's legacy in the kind of the wider community or wider circles, and people will sometimes post or randomly, you know, message me, oh, I saw this and it made me think of Lucy. It's a great reminder to me to also honor their loved ones' legacies. I think it's just all, you know, a give and take. And I know how good it feels when on an average Tuesday, first thing in the morning, I get a text from someone who says they dreamt about Lucy or something. My whole day gets lifted, and it's a good reminder for me to do the same for others. So
Yeah, I sometimes find myself thinking, I mean, I do, like you, Marlena, often think it feels so good to me that I want to bring that goodness to another person. And my work at CPN gives me the opportunity to do that a lot, just because I am also in contact with a lot of bereaved families, and also families who are still caring for their children, who also sort of feel this pressure. Because I remember, because my family was so very active in fundraising while my son was alive, there was always this pressure to sort of share Ben. And now I find myself in some ways, some days I really want to share Ben, and in some days I really just want to pull back and hoard him to myself. And that's also kind of hard when you're bereaved, because it's hard to feel those two competing feelings in a way that say, oh, you know, I want to bring him out into the world. And then sometimes, to be truthful, through my work at CPN, I feel like I'm sharing him. But wait, is there going to be less of him for me because I've now shared him out so much? So it gets complicated, and when to see the line for that can be, and then that balance of how you respond to your own grief based on how other people are receiving it is always kind of complicated too.
I think one aspect that I sometimes still struggle with is how much I share at work. So where I work now, nobody knows Jacob. Yeah, so, but I have noticed that if I can share that I had a child living with mitochondrial disease and he passed away, it's always very well received, but it's not something you bring up in a big business meeting. But when you are able to do that, it really shifts. And I have noticed that it can then open up much more openness also in the workplace. But there I sometimes still struggle. When do I say that? Because it's such an important part of who I am. But it's not the first thing that you're gonna, share. But it has always been very, very positive. But there, I'm still sometimes figuring out, like, when is the right time to share this important part of who I am today.
I'd like to go on that topic a little bit more, Maria. And you were talking about how it's always positive when you share. And I'm wondering if other people have had that same experience, because there are people around, and in general, our society is so grief and death averse. And sometimes it can be so hard to share something so vulnerable when you don't know how people around you are going to receive it. So I'm wondering if you have had any experiences, or even in general, of how it's been received when you talk about your children.
I think for me, I've been given the gift of time since Henry's death, and in those 7+ years, I've really played around with my responses to questions about how many kids do you have, or any type of kind of conversation around the fact that I have a dead son. And I have found the things that don't work for me, because I've tried them and they felt terrible. And I have found things that really do rest softly on my heart. And so I feel like now I'm kind of in a place where I can just feel a little bit more solid with that. But that comes with time and experience and practice, and it still shifts. I mean, it's not, and it will continue to. But I think that for me, what rests with me is that I always acknowledge that I have 3 children. Sometimes I say that Henry is the age that he would be if I don't want to talk anymore about it. And sometimes I am very forthcoming. And I'm finding that most times I am very forthcoming because I'm really passionate about advocating for normalizing all of this. Kids are not going to stop dying because we don't talk about it. And so I have found that I am almost, I'd say 99% of the time, I'm very forthcoming and very matter of fact about it, regardless of how it makes the other person feel. I've probably ruined a lot of days in my life, a lot of other people's days. And I don't let that bother me anymore. Because
Rachel,
I know the bigger.
I'm right with you.
I
Right
know,
with you.
know.
I love the idea of normalizing it and just having it part of the everyday conversation, because that's where it belongs. And even tonight, as I introduced myself, I caught myself saying Lucy passed away in 2018, which is not my general language. I usually say died. And it's funny how I soften it when I'm in an unknown crowd of people. But no, I usually say died. And it, you know, some people are visibly horrified by that, or how matter of fact I state those kinds of things. And so, you know, I do find myself censoring a little bit, but it's more the language around it than it is the message. The message is Lucy lived, she died, she's very much part of my life still, and I love her to pieces, and I'm going to talk about her. And I'm with you. Maybe I have made some uncomfortable conversations and everything, but it really does not bother me.
Sometimes I get kind of this response, like, I can't imagine anything worse than losing a child. And I really feel compelled to respond to that. I don't want people's pity. I don't feel good when people say, I'm so sorry for your loss. I feel compelled to talk to them about, well, if you think there's nothing worse than losing your child, well, I do. I think not having 3 years and 17 days with my daughter Adelaide in my life would be worse. I think not showing up for my living children right now and not living my life to the fullest would be worse. I honestly think, you know, Adelaide never gave up and I never will. And so I really turn it back to people with just an essence of gratitude for her life. And that has only transformed over 5 years for me. That's pretty recent, to where I've always felt this sense of like, I don't want you to say you're sorry to me. It just never felt good. So I've really just developed this response through a transformation that I had, where I just got to the acceptance phase of my new connection with my daughter. And it really is just a sense of gratitude for the 3 years that I had with her. And I feel the need to tell people that, because like Rachel said, kids are not going to stop dying. Dying is a guarantee, right? But meaning and purpose are not. So I feel like when people come at me with that, I kind of speak up sometimes now. And I also struggle with the question of how many kids do you have? And I decide how important you are in my life, whether I tell you if I have 2 or 3, if I want to entertain that conversation or not. But yeah, I've really felt like Rachel has always said this, right? Like, dying is not the worst thing that can happen to us. And one of the things we like to say in our grief group is that this is not the grief Olympics, right? we are not competing in our grief here. And so everybody's unique and everybody experiences things at a different time. People will transform in different ways through different years. And that's what I love so much about this group is, when I came into the group, I was only 1 and 2 years out, and I saw people that were 5, 6, and 7 years out. And I often wondered, wow, they're still here. Is this going to be me in 5 years? And why are they still here? Have they not moved on? And what I've really realized is they've transformed their grief into a different connection with their child. And they want to be here with people like them. They want to support people that are at year 1, are at year 2, are at year 3. And I'm extremely grateful to be in the presence of people with early grief and late grief, because that just makes me a better person in what I'm experiencing. So I continue to show up even years later, just like the people I encountered. I think I feel comfortable. I feel like these are people you can relate to. And as you guys know, not everybody understands where you're at. So Yeah, I can appreciate you guys.
I would just echo everything Christina and Rachel said. Honestly, for me personally, it was very isolating right after it happened, because at work, literally people would avoid me, which is a big part of why Rob and I talked about grief at work and in the workplace and how to manage that and emotional intelligence. And as Jennifer mentioned, our children are around us now, so that's why you hear the little voices. But it's really, it's hard for us when people feel the pity, and we struggle with how to respond to that still. But I will tell you that we are happy to tell people what happened and agree with Christina wholeheartedly. We are thankful for the 13 months we had with him, and we wouldn't trade that for the world.
I'd like to ask you guys just one more question, if possible, because we've talked a lot about sharing your children and to use Rachel's language, parenting your children. And so I'm wondering, before we get done with the questions, if you guys can just share the ways that you privately and publicly still parent your children, I think that would be great.
I say goodnight every night. I have purposely put our clothes hamper in my daughter's room, or my other surviving child's hamper. And so we have to go in there. And when I throw that stuff in there every night, I say, good night, Lucy. You know, I've got my necklace and my tattoo. She's just with me. But the other thing that I don't know that I've ever shared, but I feel compelled to right now, early in my grief, I was in her room crying, and I noticed that her picture, it was like a school portrait, was right at my level. And if I stood just right, our features completely aligned perfectly, like same ratio between, and that was the first time I felt that the bond was still there. And so when the sun comes in her room, I try to stand in front of that picture and just remind myself that we are the same, we're together, she's still with me. So that's my little ways of doing it.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
So every time I see a butterfly, I think it's Jacob coming to say hi or give me a message. So I always say, thank you, Jacob, when I see a butterfly.
Similar to that, Maria, we call them hugs from Henry. We get signs from the little prince or foxes a lot. I talk to him every day, all day long. I ask him to help me make decisions. I ask him to put certain things in my path, so I know I'm making him proud and doing what I need to do while I'm here. And you know, we have a memorial bench for him in the Botanic Gardens. It's a very special place. We marked the year he would start kindergarten by donating a Gaga pit to his elementary school, and that became a really beautiful community project. We assembled the Gaga pit together. There was just a group of people who wanted to show up, our friends and community members, and it was all for Henry. And then that became a big school announcement that, and of course Henry's siblings felt super proud. So we bring him into the world in very small and very big ways. Big times. I haven't started a foundation or written a book or anything, but this is a tough crowd to feel like I'm on par with.
You know, I would also add that sometimes when I'm parenting my other two children, both of whom are adults now, so they're 24 and 28. Although they always remain your children in that sort of motherly kind of way. But sometimes when I am parenting them, I do think to myself, not what would Ben do, but what way would I be parenting Ben in this decision? Because they have all very distinct personalities. I mean, Ben was alive till he was 17 years old. So I sort of could see the personality in spite of his disease. And I sometimes have to self-correct in the way that I'm parenting my other two children and think, I'm going to make a different decision right now about this because I think I would have made a different one for Ben, and I have to give them the grace of that same situation. So I think it still comes into your active parenting of your other children. And then certainly for me at CPN, I bring Ben into the public sphere of parenting him when I'm talking to other parents, even just to say, you know, how do I help another parent answer the question? And how many kids do you have? And I say to them repetitively, it's always your story to tell. And it's always it can change from one day to the next. And as long as you feel okay about it, it's good. And when I say those words, I hear Ben, like I hear him saying it. So I think, you know, and again, to Rachel's point, it doesn't have to be something big. Ben loved to wear crazy socks. So sometimes it's just what, you know, when the Boston bombing came, I got out my Superman socks and put them on because I felt like that was the right day to put it on after the marathon bombing. So I just sort of picked like, oh, today I'm in the mood. I need a little extra zhuzh. I'm going to put on my ninja socks. And then Ben is sort of, I'm parenting him because I'm channeling our ninja togetherness. So I don't know. I'm in cahoots with all of you.
Jennifer, I think one of the coolest things, and I will think of your son now with crazy socks, is that when you get to be part of things like this, like every time I see things with foxes on it, I take a picture and text Rachel, and you give other people the opportunity to think of your child. And it's like the Lucy effect, right? You're spreading your child and giving others the opportunity, like the Applegates said too, to come into your world and experience things with you and just kind of spread that love that your child brought. And it could be through really small things. And I will say I struggled for 4 years really figuring out like what was my sign. I was always jealous of Rachel with her fox, and I was like, what is mine, right? Maria has the butterfly, and really it didn't come to me right away. And it just took years and years of evolving through what I felt came to me, right? And it turned out it was a dandelion that came in a picture of Adelaide. And now I love that I give the opportunity to my family and friends to text me. Just the other day, my cousin saw a bottle of wine with a dandelion on it, and she texted it to me, and it really made me feel good to let other people in and share her for that moment. I do share a lot of those feelings, Jennifer, though, with not wanting to share her sometimes and really wanting her for myself. But it makes me feel good when I give other people an opportunity to share. And I know about the women in this group, and I always think of their children. And I think the fact that your network brings people like this together, and the fact that other organizations could build something like what Cassie's built with us, makes me really excited. And I just want to let everybody know that when that starts at the next hospital, when you're a part of it, it's a really powerful program. And it's really been monumental in my life to just be part of Cassie's program. So thank you.
Yeah, I always tuck the kids in, like even when William was alive, you know, I was the one to tuck the kids in. You know, we've got a 15-year-old, I still tuck him in, but kind of that ritual of going around, you know, tucking the oldest in and tucking the 6-year-old in now. But we essentially got a cast of William's hand, you know, on the day that he was born. The hospital made that for us. So tugging him in is basically touching the little ceramic hand of his every night before I go to bed, and you know, when all the other kids are getting tucked in as well.
I think we're a small enough crowd here that if somebody has questions, it's 8:53, so we still have a few more minutes left in our session, and I'm sure we have a lot more to say, but I want to invite people who are attending the session to just come in and unmute themselves and ask a question if you have one, or just if you have some input that you'd like to share too about your continued bond with your child. We welcome you to bring it to everyone.
I so appreciate this group and the panelists coming together this evening, and I'm 16 months out from losing my child, and I was shocked around the year mark to realize that it was getting harder and not easier, because I was having to, you know, there's the shock of the death, even when it's a death, like with my child, we had known his whole life was coming. There's the shock of the death, and then there is learning to live with their absence. And for me, that was like two very distinct things and distinct phases. So I just so appreciate you all normalizing that and sharing the ways that you have carried that and let it evolve over the years, because I think that's something that newly bereaved people need to be reminded of, is like it will change shape, and that's okay. And I will just offer that for Colson's first birthday, without him, he always sat in his chair in a very specific spot in the house. And so we got a big plant to fill that spot with. And it's something that I can tend, and that has felt really, really nourishing. So thank you all for your stories.
Thanks, Liz. I think Liz also brought up a really good point, something that we hear a lot of times at CPN as well, which is how grief sort of evolves and changes, and somewhat the pressures of some of that, and the you don't really realize it. I remember, Liz, thinking year 3 was actually my worst year, and that we still anticipate things, and we experience anticipatory grief for the things that are coming. You know, I know I felt it creeping in for me at year 5, and how could I be at that milestone, and what was going to happen. And I think just hearing from everybody tonight about the little ways that they stay connected, and the ways that that has moved and metamorphosed into something different, and that we have to be accepting of that within ourselves, which is really hard, right? It can be scary a little bit to let go of some of your grief, or to say that I could modulate it a little bit better than I could have last week. It can be very frightening, because in some ways, at least for me, it has felt like, oh no, am I losing this piece? And I still feel that some days, but I will also say to you that I think feeling those bonded moments really ease you through that.